Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, folks. I hope
Assalamu
you're
alaikum, Sheikh.
well. Alaikum salam. Um, my intention with this session was to have the opportunity to explore um, some of the questions that arose from the dars that I conducted on the breaking of norms. And so I really would like to spend most of the time, maximum up to an hour or so, just exploring any questions that might have arisen either from that dars or generally anything that people would like to explore or examine or understand. Um, so I thought maybe I'll talk about the breaking of norms for 2 minutes, and then I would like to break you into groups, and and then anything that arises from that or any other questions that you'd like to explore, you then sort of you discuss that, and then it'll just be like a 4 or 5 minute breakout session. And then you come back to me and say, well, this needs clarifying, or we'd like to explore that, or whatever. That's sort of my intention. So to start off with the idea of breaking of norms, I mean, what I mean by this is there's quite a common theme in tasawwuf of this idea of Allah can break norms for you, and you can have an experience of the breaking of norms. And what does that mean? It means literally to live in the realm of the miraculous, where you experience things and you do things and you have access to things which you cannot entirely account for rationally. Now, all of us, if you've been around for a little while, we've had tastes of things that you can't account for rationally. Um, and the issue is how does one get access to that realm of the miraculous um, more consistently? And Sheikh Muhammad al-Habib says that, how do you expect the breaking of norms for yourself if you don't break norms? Now, what does that mean? The Most of us have quite a conditional engagement with life. We 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 do things to get things. In fact, that's more or less how we construct our idea of intent, how most people construct the idea of intent, is that intent is always about an outcome which somehow is of benefit to the self. I've even heard people say that truly unconditional motive is an impossibility. There's no such thing as in that sense as giving, and as giving unconditionally. And how does one then kind of come to grips with this idea of giving unconditionally? In the first instance, one needs to understand how our conditional motive works. Our conditional motive can actually be quite complex. It's the equations that we run in our minds that have at some
Quick
point
impromptu Zoom.
um, uh, uh,
Huh?
let me just
Those people.
turn this down off.
Huh?
Um,
I think that's the question. I said, you know what? I used to do a Zoom call on the weekend on that.
there you go. I beg your pardon. So as I was saying, let me do it this way, then I can see if somebody's not muted. I beg your pardon. If you don't mind, folks, if you just mute your microphones while until we start to talk, because it's a bit sort of confusing. So what do we mean by norms? Norms are our assumption of how the world works. And it's based on our assumptions of how the world works that we then construct patterns of intent that will produce outcomes in our benefit. Um, uh, for instance, you know, I know that if I treat a person in a particular way, they would like me, and it therefore will be easy for me to get out of them what I want. That's what I mean. Kind of like so it's the equations that we run that at some point there's an equal sign, and on the other equal sign there's what's in it for me. Um, the the so for example, and these can be very long, and they actually get these equations get longer as we get older. We start off as a child, as an infant, the equation's very immediate and very short. I will be happy if they put something in my mouth and they clean my bottom. That's it. Happiness is a full more and a cleaned bottom. Um, into middle childhood, that becomes a little bit more muted because we start to understand that the other has the power to withhold the good auspices of the self. So we said, no, no, hold on. You actually have to get them to like you, because when they like you, they have power over you, and when they like you, then it's easier for them to kind of do what you want. Fill your maw and kind of clean your bottom. That state of middle childhood transmutes into the state of the adolescence, who's come to the rather disturbing insight, which says that, the problem with always appeasing people and trying to be liked is that they stop taking you seriously. Far more important than being liked, the key issue of life, the key challenge of life, is to be seen to be significant, is to be taken seriously. So the kind of compliant attitude of middle childhood translates into the competitiveness and the rebellion of adolescence. We really are sort of insisting on your own significance. So what's happened is that you've the sort of equation gets longer. In order to be happy, the thought was, I need a full moon and an empty bowel. But actually, to get that, I've got to get them as my allies. In order to get that, I've got to get them to see me to be significant, which basically means at every point, the point of satisfaction, the point of getting what you want, of the happiness that you think is on the other side, the rainbow moves further and further away. Now, in adolescence, that becomes really very challenging because this competitiveness of adolescence produces a constant engagement of win-lose experiences with other people. And the problem with win-lose is that it turns into lose-lose, because if you examine the whole problem of competitiveness, if I'm competing with you, the reason why I'm competing with you is I want to win, and the reason why I want to win is I want to get your good opinion of me. I want to get significance from you. I want to get your regard. The problem is, for me to win, you have to lose. So I want you to love me by making you come second. Now, there's clearly quite a strange kind of logic in that. So in adolescence, you get exactly the opposite of what you want, which then means to say that you actually, hold on, you've actually got to genuinely get them to be your allies. You've actually got to go the extra mile for them. You've got to start kind of serving the other, the social other. And there's an insight that starts to develop into your adulthood, that you have only license to be happy once everybody else is happy. Now, that's a hell of a prospect. In other words, happiness is now not just about getting a set of conditions around yourself. Happiness is concerned with setting a set of conditions for everybody around you. So your point of happiness gets further and further away. The equations that you're running that equal, I will then be happy, my interests will be served, get longer and longer and longer. That can produce, should produce in your sort of midlife some kind of a crisis where you forego what's on the other side of the equal sign. In other words, all of these, the the entire equation has gone this plus this plus this equals I am happy. It is my interests. At some point, you forego what's on the equal sign. It's not, my interests are irrelevant. And then you start to discover that the thing that you're pursuing is not outside of yourself, it's inside of yourself. That the emptiness that you want to get filled, which you think is on the other side of the equation, can actually be translated into a fullness whereby you engage the equation in the first place. And that becomes a completely different experience. That, as we said, your intent isn't an emptiness that seeks to be filled. Your intent becomes a fullness that spontaneously empties. Now, once that has happened, you engage the realm of the miraculous because you're no longer negotiating with life. And because you're no longer negotiating with life, you're no longer insisting that life follows the predictable patterns, because these negotiations, these equations are all based on assumptions of how the world works. But once you've foregone the equations, there's no longer an assumption of how the world works, which means the true miraculous nature of the world can become apparent to you. So once you've sort of foregone outcomes and you've just left what's on the other side of the equal sign open-ended, you then engage in the realm of the miraculous, where that which is unpredictable, that which is beyond the norm, becomes, in a sense, the commonplace for you. Because you have broken the norms get broken for you. So that was kind of what I was attempting to explore in that dars. Bearing in mind that obviously in the dars you're in a bit of a swoon after the dhikr, so sometimes you're not entirely rational, and indeed it is a rather challenging subject, so I'm not entirely sure that I did the matter justice now. And that's why I think it might be helpful for us to have a bit of a conversation about this now. So, but what I'm going to do is to kind of just tease some thoughts out. I'm going to break you into rooms. I'm going to break you into rooms of 5 people. And maybe if each room can just come up with a question. You say, well, that sounds okay, but what about this? Welcome back, folks. You've been rudely ejected from your pleasant little conversation.
It was a very short breakout.
Public. Was it too short? Has there been enough?
No.
Definitely not the norm. Definitely not the norm.
Yeah. Okay. I can put you back in for a bit longer if you think you want to complete your conversation.
No, we want to hear your thoughts on it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so that's fine, folks. That's very generous of you. Thank you, Anna. So the room 1 is Amra, Irma, Mahin, Meb, Riaz, Sahab, and Shama. Nice to see you all. And by the way, folks, it is very nice to see you all. Thank you. Thank you for honoring me with being here. So is anybody going to speak for room number 1, and just any question that arose that you'd like to, I mean, there might have been more than one, but let's just deal with one at a time per group. We see how we go.
I will speak for the group. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Saab.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you, sir?
Alhamdulillah, very well, thank you. And I think the honor is definitely ours for being here today. So thank you for arranging this.
Right. Mahbub Saab, what is the question?
So the question we had is, once you start breaking those norms, because everybody else is expecting the norms, very quickly things become a bit uncomfortable. You start being sort of seen as the odd one out. Maybe people perceive you as having a midlife crisis. Where does that sort of lead then? Is it, well, you'll probably be a little bit lonely, and actually that's the path that you've chosen to take? Or will other people change? Or does that not matter, and you kind of just got to break the norms, and whatever happens, happens?
I think what happens over time is that you start experiencing a new circle of companionship, which may or may not include the people that you were companionable with before, But it's a circle of companionship which in itself has a magical character. Where this is sort of like it's a subset of this idea of when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. Well, when the fakir is ready, the world arrives. When the fakir is ready, this magic, because imagine having an experience where you no longer have to run contracts with people, where people aren't asking you to run their lives according to your expectations of them, or their expectations of you, rather. That there's a kindness and a gentleness in terms of people's interaction with you. Now, what happens is because you yourself are transcending norms, that is kind of how you become. And many people respond to that. Many people respond to, wow, I've not experienced you like this before. I mean, I've experienced you as actually being quite a manipulating piece of work, and you're no longer manipulating me. That's fantastic. And that it gives people in your circle the license not to manipulate back. It also creates the conditions where people are deeply entrenched in a contractual way of dealing with you and a contractual way of looking at life, find it intolerable to be around you, and they leave. But it's only in order to make space for somebody else. We only have so many seats around our inner dinner table, and how do you propose to make a place vacant for the queen if you're not going to ask the gangster to leave? So there's an element of, as we grow, as we change, and this is, the circle around us grows and changes. And hopefully that circle around us becomes a circle of higher and finer quality. Secondly, the companionship of people is nice, but it's not all it's made out to be if you can be companionable with the stars. If every time you set foot outside of your house, the trees greet you, the flowers wave hello, you have a living interaction with the whole of life around you. But to have that living interaction with the whole of life around you, you need to put people in their place. You need to allow them to recede a little bit into the background so that the total picture and the magnificence of the total picture that you're confronted with can become apparent to you. So the point I'm trying to make, therefore, is that you probably, as you grow, you will lose relationships. I think that's true. Good for you. That is making space for better relationships, and it's also making space for the more important relationship, which is with you and as we call it, the totality of the other, which is the face of Allah. Thank you for that, Mahmoud. I'll ask, we'll go to room 2 now. Amina and Anna and Fariha and the double-barreled Linda. There's 2 Lindas. So Linda, have you had a twin? What's happened? Or they're 2 different, actually. Walaikum salam.
Good to see you, Sheikh. Question I had was, the way you talk about full goal outcome is like, it's actually quite sometimes very hard, because we think of always the if of the situation. So that was my question. But Anna, can you say the other question? That was a very good question from the sister. I forgot her name. Anna will help you there.
We had 2 really good questions, and if we should take them in the chronological order they appeared, the first one was around, so I don't remember now who put it, but it was very cleverly put. This equation that you talk about, how do we keep it simple? Because the older and more outward we get, the more complicated the equation gets. That was the first question from the group.
Well, so I mean, I suppose an easy way to keep it simple is to retrogress. In other words, to start behaving like a child again. You know, you're giving me a hug, I'm happy. You're scowling at me, I'm not happy. Let's go even earlier than that. You know, I've had a good bowel movement, I'm happy. I haven't had a bowel movement, the world is a terrible place. I don't think that's a kind of a useful way to be. So I don't. So the issue isn't retrogression. That we're being pitched forward. We're being pitched forward through a journey where, in fact, the fundamental problem of putting happiness on the other side of an outcome becomes increasingly apparent. Now, the way to deal with that isn't to retrogress. I mean, the most classical way that people retrogress in our society is when they hit their midlife crisis, they become adolescents again. You know, they sort of, throw the spouse overboard, buy a Harley Davidson, and I don't know, go on an ayahuasca kind of, I don't know, do some crazy stuff. But I don't think that's an appropriate thing to do. There's a forward pitching to this, which is to not try and re-engineer the world, but it's to completely forego your desire for an outcome. To understand that your suffering is the result of an intent to achieve an outcome. Now, that sort of probably also reflects back to Linda's question. I mean, this is not necessarily an easy thing to do. This is, we've actually been, I think Allah's created this journey of being human being an increasingly intolerable state, so that we can get to a point of extremity where we burn the palace of outcomes to the ground. Because this is no longer, this is not tolerable. This is an impossible way to live, to put my happiness on the other side of something that's going to happen in the future. I am going to find what there is to be happy about right now. And if I try, it doesn't matter how complex or how challenging the context that I'm in, I will find that which I can be grateful for. And make what I'm grateful for now the point of me being alive. So it is not about making your motive simpler. It is about understanding that the very structure of intent that puts your happiness on the other side of an outcome is actually an irresolvable issue, which will make, no matter how complex the equation becomes, it still ends you up in unhappiness and suffering. Thank you, Rad. Let's take the next group. And then I see there are questions in the text. I'll come back to the questions in the text, just so that we can have some sense of fairness about this. Otherwise, we have a Twain mess in our hands. Room number 3, Aisha, Gladys, Nahid, Nick, and Rifat. Nice to see you all, by the way. Who's going to speak for that group?
Assalamu alaikum. I think Gladys was
most Nick, nice to see you.
Hey, excellent to see you all. And Anna, hey.
You're on the boat.
I think Gladys was more articulate than me. I would say that Gladys should.
Okay,
speak.
All right, Gladys, let's hear.
Assalamu alaikum also. Thank you for listening. Yes, so my question was regarding the equation. When you think of the what is before the equal sign and what is after the equal sign, when do we know what to be or to be our norm, what to change? Do we change what we desire, what is after the equal sign? Or if you want to be our norm, do we change what is before the equal sign? And when do we know we have to stop to persevere? How to do to be our norm? And do we look at the signs when we have to change what we desire, or where do we put the effort on the changes, before or after the equal signs? I guess it depends. And when do we know the threshold when we have to change it? I hope it's clear.
So yeah, I think so. I think so. This actually does resonate with Faria from group 2. I think her question, which was, if we forego the assumptions of how the world works, when do we stop tying the camel? Now, I'm sure you're aware of the narration of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, where somebody said to him, "So I don't have to tie my camel anymore. I mean, you know, everything will be okay." And he said, "No. You trust in Allah and you tie your camel." Now, I'd like to introduce or reiterate the central importance of the issue of gratitude in all of this. See, if I do something to achieve an outcome in the future, there's some level of judgment of the experience that I'm having now. It's saying, this is not adequate. I need something different or better. Which means this very structure of what's going on inside my chest is it's an unhappiness, it's a judgment, it's like a hole, it's an emptiness that is seeking to be filled. Now, if, however, I realize that actually I am sitting on the king's ransom, I have now achieved, that's the wrong word, I have been granted something of such stupendous value. Happiness is just enjoying the banquet that's in front of me now. I don't need another place. This is it. It can't get better than this. Now, amazingly, the difference between the first and the second state is not the context you're in. You can get a very poor person who says, my life is miserable, I need wealth. You can get a very poor person who says, isn't my life extraordinary? And finds bases their day-to-day interaction on, isn't my life extraordinary? So there's that basing your engagement with your day-to-day experience on the basis of a constant revision of what there is to be grateful for, a deep sense of gratitude produces a fullness in the heart rather than an emptiness in the heart. The fullness in the heart does enable you to act into the future. So you still tie the camel or do things, going back to Faria's question. But it's no longer in the context of trying to produce outcomes in your own interest. It's in the spirit of service of how can I make what is around me a little bit better right now? I mean, I have so much, it overflows, and it's the nature of something that overflows to flow somewhere. And where's it going to flow to now? Well, it flows to the help that I can render now. And maybe, in fact, the help that I can render now is not tying my camel, but tying Nick's camel. So there's a complete re-engineering of how motive works. It's no longer sort of making the emphasis, your orientation of your attention into the future, trying to get stuff. It is actually keeping enough reflection on the past so that you can realize just how blessed you are now, so that you can stay full, so that your intent is a fullness that empties, not an emptiness that seeks to be filled. Now, I do want to just confirm again, going back to the question that Faria, this doesn't mean to say you don't act, but it really decomplicates your action unbelievably. If the only question is that you're asking yourself, well, how can I be helpful in the situation that I'm in? That makes for a hell of a lot easier than, how am I going to make sure I get a pension in 30 years' time? I mean, that's quite a long sort of question, that. But the degree to which you spontaneously act, this is the key thing. when you act in such a way to guarantee your future in 30 years' time, the thing you're trying to guarantee your future from is it's from the other. You know, the bank account, whatever, it sits in the world, it's in the other. How much more secure can you be than how you would be if you had the other that faces you as your ally and your benefactor? If you engage with the world in such a way where your future is guaranteed by others, by other than you, guaranteed by other than you, not compelled from them because you've made the investment and now you have a right to the future. The future is guaranteed by other than you because they are your allies. That's a completely different way of living. You live in a universe of friends, you know, where the degree to which you are having to negotiate the future in your own interests is the degree to which you will live in a universe of enemies. Because the things you're trying to get are things you try to get from someone or somewhere. And nothing likes to be gotten from. Whereas if your fundamental engagement with the world is unconditional service, then those things that you're trying to get from whoever you're trying to get them from, you don't need to get because they want to give it to you. You spontaneously get outcomes which are kind of inexplicably good in your interest. That's what I mean by living in the realm of the miraculous, where there's an ingenuity that comes to play that looks after your interests that you cannot account for. We say, you know, Allah, provide for me from where I cannot predict. And I can't guarantee. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, it means I can't be clever enough to account for my provision. Simple as that. Why? Because it's accounted for by a much bigger intelligence than mine, which is the orchestrated world that I face. And how does that look after me? Because I've not turned it into my enemy. I've turned it into my ally. Sorry, I'm in a bit of a soapbox on this one. I beg your pardon. I'll go on to room 4. That's Aisha Fatima Mariam Shahid, Dr. Shahid, the best dentist in the Southern Hemisphere, apart from obviously Aisha. And then Zahida and Zainab. Who's going to talk?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Sir.
Walaikum salam, Fatima. How are you?
I am well, Alhamdulillah. We didn't really decide who would speak for the group because we were actually just discussing. So we didn't really come up with a question, but I suppose Aisha can also add, but I suppose the kind of question or the comments that we had, I think you've addressed this in the latter half of the last question. But basically, just to give you an idea, what we were discussing was what really happens when your intent becomes unconditional and you step into the realm of the magical or miraculous. Just exactly what begins to happen. And I think you've kind of covered that. That's what we were talking about, but maybe Aisha can fill in. Thank you.
Okay. Aisha?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Saab. Yeah,
Walaikum salam. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, good. I've got another Aisha with me here, so the two of us sitting.
All right, 2 Aishas.
So no, Alhamdulillah. So yeah, I think it was just how do you tap into the miracle? And I think also perhaps a question that was on everyone's mind was, what is a miracle? What do you constitute a miracle?
No one can. These things are only things that you can kind of account for on the basis of your own life and your own experience. And so for me, a miracle is something that comes right, fixes itself, despite or beyond my own ability to manage the affair. So I've had a few in the recent past. I have a brother who, my sole surviving brother, and I mean, this has been a long-standing dispute that was based on a business engagement that went sour, and that he blamed me for. Whether it was legitimate or illegitimate, the point is that the man would not speak to me. He would have nothing to do with me for decades. And he sent me a message out of the blue, and we had a conversation, and it was like the fight never happened. That's a miracle. Another one that I had access to quite recently relates to my brother, my other brother. One of my brothers passed away earlier in 2023, and he had been his entire life. I mean, he died in his early 80s. His entire adult life had been a member of the sort of resistance movement in South Africa, a member of the sort of South African exile emigre movement, anti-apartheid movement. And he had been unfairly accused of being a spy for the South African government in the late 70s. And that dogged him his entire life. He had a miserable life as a result. His entire life was basically running from pillar to post and living in penury. He finally gave up on being a South African. He went to the Netherlands to be with his daughter in 2022. He was there for 6 months and he died. 2 weeks before he died, the two key people who had accused him or had actually orchestrated this charge against him that he had been a spy, both of them went to press saying this was not the case, that he was actually one of the heroes of the movement. I mean, his life got vindicated a heartbeat before he died, and he was conscious of it having happened. That for me is a miracle. You know, I mean, that you know, it really doesn't. So it doesn't matter how long the train of suffering is. You know, if the life can end at a satisfied exhalation, I've been vindicated. Alhamdulillah. That's the miracle. And every life, I think, can end like that. So these are some experiences that I have in my own life. Sometimes the dua, I mean, I mentioned it in the I think it was in the same, it was recently in any case, in one of the discourses after the dhikr, there was, you know, Anna and I had gone on this trip and something had happened and I thought this was an irresolvable, catastrophic disaster. It really was. I mean, I was terrified. And this thing just resolved itself. I mean, one man did something that I thought was completely impossible. He did it in 10 minutes and he asked me 100 rand for the service. It was unbelievable. I mean, you could have knocked me down with a feather. You know, so all of us have these things that happen to us on an ongoing basis. The problem is we're not aware of them. The issue isn't that the miraculous doesn't happen. We're not aware of them. So you know, and it's because our part of what becoming conditional means is that you trivialize things because they don't suit you. I mean, it's not part, you know, it's, you know, how can I put it? I mean, I'm really busy trying to score this new client. For me now to be fascinated with the fact that my finger can do this is really not very useful. You know, if I spent enough time working out that my finger can do this is such a stupefying thing of such extraordinary, miraculous kind of, I'm going to forget about that client. You know, I mean, it's like you are sitting in a weaving together of the most extraordinary conditions that account for you to be alive now. That's miraculous. That's so miraculous, it's stupefying. You know, and it's inconvenient if you're a busy person who's got a business to run. It's very inconvenient. You know, mother, why are you looking at the flower like that? go away. Go away. You know, I mean, this is clearly not a very constructive way of being. So that's why we dumb down our exposure to the miraculous and our experience of the miraculous, which is the nature of everyday life, because it presents itself to us as impractical. But you know, the shuyukh tell us, make Allah your concern, and He will look after your other concerns. You know, be fascinated with this to the point of being useless. The client will come to you. Test him. Try. So the only way one can kind of be fully convinced of the story is to actually start to develop your own sort of little library of experiences that you say, look, I can't account for that thing and we all just go and examine them. You'll find them. First, there'll be the obviously miraculous things, like my brother just being vindicated after literally 50 years of being out in the cold, a month before he died. I mean, literally on his deathbed. From, you know, just lots and lots of things like that can happen. Two, do I need to have something that looks kind of bizarre and extraordinary and out of the way for me to be convinced that right now I'm sitting in the middle of a super miracles? Alhamdulillah. Thank you. The last room 5, is Alicia Amina Muhammad Najib Sahab. I hope you're well, Najib Sahab. Nur, and Zeres. I don't know who Zeres is.
Hi. I'll quickly jump in if that's okay. I'm really sorry to my group because I don't think we quite got to agree on the question, but I think like the other groups,
I was too impatient and I went too quickly. Almost.
No, I think no. It's a really interesting topic. So I think yeah. So our question or what we managed to talk about was around the intention in this kind of breaking the norm. So to use your example with the finger and the client, and I personally find that studying it, but you know, examining this on an intellectual level like we do with you is very different to the actual experiential side. And so my question is, using this example of the client and being fascinated by the finger, if you've just told us that the client will come to us if we are fascinated with the finger, it's actually quite difficult to do that authentically.
No, that's right. No,
right?
Spot on.
So
if you're doing this to get the client,
yeah,
you've broken the rule.
What do you mean you've broken the rule?
Well, look. I mean, because then you've just so that's a wonderful kind of challenge that Alicia, because this is the mistake that all millenarian movements make. And I want to give you an example of a millenarian movement. So millenarian movements are sort of movements that believe if you do one extreme thing, the good Lord will give a new universe for you, will change things, will kind of rectify all wrongs. So there was a CRS in the Eastern Cape of Southern Africa, a young Xhosa girl called Nomawuse. We had a vision that if the people burnt their crops and they killed their cattle, the ancestors will come out of the sea, will kill all the whites, get rid of all of the whites, and a new sort of paradise of sort of milk and honey and well-being and overflowing will arise. In other words, if you throw away everything, you'll get everything. And unfortunately, this lass was very influential. And there ensued an event called the Great Xhosa Cattle Killing, where they literally entire districts, the people would get up one day, they'd slaughter their cattle, they'd burn their crops, and they'd sit and wait for their ancestors to come and save them. That is saying, I can do one final act, one extreme act that'll produce an extreme outcome. I think very often suicide bombing is kind of in this category. I'll do the final act and I'll get paradise. It's like the highest transaction. You know, this is the most extreme transaction. Now, if you dial down a little bit on the extremity of that, what you're saying is I can exploit the miraculous in my interest. The miraculous only exists, well, the purpose of the miraculous is to demonstrate to you is that you are incapable of acting in your own interest. So you don't do the extreme thing and so that you can, so that you can get the outcome. You forego outcomes. And when you forego outcomes, it means by definition, whatever the outcome is, it's not the one that you expected because you forgot an outcome. But when I'm doing this in order to get the client, I'm not foregoing any outcome. There's definite, I want the client. That's what I'm doing. Then I'm just saying, okay, you're not watching me. I'm just I'm saying to my Rob. You can see that I'm very, 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 very fascinated with it. I know that you're going to give me whatever he has to give to you is infinitely better than what you can have in store for yourself. That's one of the ways in which we understand that existence is miraculous. One of the problems of our lines of text that we run, these equations that we run, is that we actually settle for some really dingy and mean outcomes. And what I mean by mean, I don't mean nasty. I mean like poor, like tacky, you know? So, let me bomb. Don't do that. I mean, I hope I understood your question properly, Alicia. But,
yeah.
This is about leaving the whole issue of outcome open-ended, knowing it'll be best and better than what the thing is that you could design for yourself. And surprising. Like my brother suddenly coming after 20 years of alienation. Surprising. Truly surprising. Alhamdulillah. So there was a question. So there's one more question in the chat group. In the chat, there's from Riyal Saham. Adding to this, plan as if you would live forever, live as you would die tomorrow. How does planning at work and personal life align with not thinking about outcomes on the other side of, yeah. Well, I mean, clearly there's more to you, to your life. There's a lot more to your life than planning. So if we go to the beginning of that text, plan as if you would live forever, but however, live like you're going to die tomorrow. So most of the time, you're assuming you're going to die tomorrow. But when you plan, insofar as you're planning, use your intelligence and create a nice picture in the sky so that Allah can surprise you. You've heard that wonderful story, eh? What is it again now? How do you make God laugh? You tell him your plans. In fact, there's no harm to putting down a plan because partly the plan allows you to be doubly surprised when that which is truly extraordinary happens. But it does mean that you don't take your plan, you don't live by your plan. You live like you're going to die tomorrow. You don't live in the doing things now to get in the future. You do the plan as almost like a theoretical exercise. You do the plan, and you also treat the plan with a good measure of skepticism and humor, because Allah is Khairul Makirin. And the reason why He's kind of asking you to plan, I suppose, is so that He can demonstrate to you that He's Khairul Makirin, which means you are something other than Khairul Makirin. You are something less than. Now, how can He demonstrate that you're less than if you haven't produced the plan in the first place? Alhamdulillah. All right, folks, we've gone for almost an hour. It was about as long as I thought we should go. If there's something anybody would like to sort of pick up, want clarified, we can do that. You can also put it in the chat if that's going to be useful to you. Yes, Afia, of course you can ask one.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Saab. It's so good to see you.
Alhamdulillah, it's good to hear you.
Thank you. Sheikh Saab, my question is that so organizations spend a lot of time planning and then allocating budgets to that plan. But how do you feel that organizations should start off their planning with this concept in mind that all outcomes aren't really in their hands? And would that make an organization open to the possibility of more agility? How do they build that into their structure? What is your stance on it?
Afia, I would not suggest to organizational people that they should not have plans. And that they should, I've indicated before that the path of the fuqara leads out of the city. What does that mean? These higher parts of your being actually ask you to live in a way that doesn't make you entirely socially functional. So I think true committed tasawwuf is something you have to do as a sideshow if you're running a big organization. And you can only get to start doing once you sort of are on your way out of the organization. It is the nature of social groups to have to plan. It's the nature of social groups to have to be structured, to be rule-bound, to actually have roles and expectations defined. That is how it is. We're in a sense saying that there's a part of our being which is not of the city. It is not of the compliance. It is of the wild. And that's the part that you're engaging when you're on the path. And insofar as you still maintain a place in the city, you really are doing it a little bit by subterfuge. You're sort of maintaining a face, but you know that this is not the real story. So I would absolutely not have any comment about this to an organization. I'm a consultant, as by my profession. Somebody said, how do we plan based on this whole understanding of intent that you're articulating? I say, ignore what I'm saying. This is not about the organization. It's about you as an individual. It's not about the collective.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Jazakallah.
you. Thank you. Maheen, you had a question. Sometimes you had your hand up, and I'm assuming that the text is what you wanted me
Yeah,
to
Sheikh Saab, I wrote it in there. I hope that's okay.
No, that's fine.
Easier.
That's fine. Sometimes the holding on to outcomes is so subtle. I can tell myself I'm letting go, but there is still a holding on. I don't even know sometimes that I'm holding on because it's absolutely correct. And how do you know you've held on? Because you got to a point where you felt disappointed. The moment you're disappointed, the good question is, well, what did I actually want here that I've created an experience of disappointment? So your own inner experience is really your ally on this journey. You know, and that's why we should, you know, we've spoken before about the significance and usefulness of things like journaling, or at least some kind of reflective exercise where you aren't just doing muraqabah, you aren't just going deep inside yourself, but you're actually examining this experience of being in your own skin. Because it's very helpful to understand that you're disappointed, you know, because it is saying, but I must have had some expectation. If I didn't have an expectation, I wouldn't have been disappointed. Yeah. That's right. Can I differentiate between norms and mental models? I must admit, I don't, you know, there might be a technical kind of understanding of mental models that I'm not familiar with. So I wouldn't want to comment. I think I'll be commenting beyond my expertise. What I mean by norms are the convictions of how the world works that produces a pattern of kind of sort of mechanisms and levers where that allow us to manage our lives, sort of get a grip on reality. Now, that may or may not be similar to a mental model. Sorry, Fatima. Yes, I'm very happy to do this on a monthly basis. Alicia, you said that too. So there's been a number of people off that. And then there's Astor. I don't know that I have which I am. And the question: can breaking of norms lead to unintended negative consequences within the Islamic framework and communities? Yeah. You know, Sheikh Shadili, one of his famous kind of quotes is, the Shadiliya are outwardly sober and inwardly intoxicated. Now, what does that mean? That means that when you look at the person from the outside, I mean, this is actually, it says that this is the supreme kind of dissimulations happening. Because from the outside, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't mess around. I don't fiddle with people I shouldn't fiddle with. I do everything that is, I pay my dues. When you look at me at the outside, you say, hey, he's a boring man. I mean, it's just norm like any other man. But what they don't know is what's going on the inside. That's the Shadiliya. So breaking of norms does not mean to say you give yourself license to misbehave. I'm sensing that might be the question you're asking, because I do know people that this has happened to. You know, the hearts move. We have we're in a circle and we're doing dhikr together. Hearts move, and before you know it, there's some sort of inappropriate things are happening behind the curtain somewhere. And that is, the requirement is. The requirement is still for you to be sharically correct, outwardly sober, outwardly restrained. Right. Okay, so Aisha, I'm going to, hopefully this is the last, maybe it's not a question, maybe it's a statement. It's the last statement there. Is this attachment clinging to outcomes fitra, and one's journey along the path of maturation will eventually lead you to detach? Yes. We are designed to forget so that we can remember. And this is both in the big and small things. The big thing is that there's at a point you knew, you came fresh from the Rabb. You knew that you were not separate from the rest of existence. That the stars collaborated to give you your hand, and that the stars are intimately involved in the life that you have. It is one life. It's not many lives. It's one life going on, and you are an absolutely intimate participant. You knew that as an infant. You were alienated from that experience. to make you a good citizen, a useful citizen. Because a person who's completely fascinated with the sort of suit that they're swimming in this ecstatic joy, they're not good citizens. They're not useful citizens. That alienation of turning you into a useful citizen is the divine plan, because Allah created the human condition, which has this as one of its requirements. Why? So at some point you can say, but you know, there's more to life than being a useful citizen. And once you start exploring that, you re-engage this miraculous that you came from. Thank you very much, folks. And thank you very much for your participation. I'm honored that so many people decided to come. I think we will do this on a monthly basis. And yeah, and I mean, we don't have to talk about the format now. I mean, you can put it in the WhatsApp forum. We can decide how we're going to handle it. You know, I prefer not to, because it's not to replace a dars. So you know, whatever if you're listening to the durus, that's fine, that's good. But then come armed with questions. I'd like to keep this like we're doing now, sort of quite interactive. Fantastic. All the best, folks. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Saab. Thank you.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Saab. Thank you.